Yo, 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 welcome to another episode of the Roundball Ramble podcast. I'm your host, Corban Ford. You can follow me on Twitter at Corban NBA. This is a Sports Ethos presentation, so check out Sports Ethos, as always, on Twitter at Sports Ethos, online, sportsethos.com. Today, I'm joined by a good friend, frequent podcast collaborator, basketball analyst, author, you name it in the basketball space, he's probably done it. You can find him on Twitter at RVL Hoops, all one word, or find him at X now, whatever. It is Richard Liu. Richard, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Always good to have you on. Getting Richard on the show, y'all, is like a sign that basketball is coming back. Speaking of that, like I said, Ramble is coming back. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus off, just life. Just life's been going on. But with the season starting, we're going to be cranking up. In fact, once October goes, we'll be going basically every day. So stay tuned for that. You'll have Richard on a lot more. We're hopefully going to do our what we started a little bit last year with our Rebuilding Team series. We have some fun things planned in the future. But for now, I want to have Richard on to talk about just recent Team USA. And we're going to talk about that first. But I do want to bring out, listen, NBA training camp, less than 5 weeks at this point. Or less than 6 weeks at this point. Where are we at right now? Yeah. I'd say we're 4 weeks away, 3 weeks away.
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, about 3 weeks away. So less than 3 weeks away. I mentioned that Richard Liu is an author, and he has written yet another book to add to his collection of NBA draft almanacs and NBA preview almanacs. And so now the new 2023-2024 NBA preview almanac has dropped. It is really the only one of its kind out in the basketball book space in terms of analysis on every team, previewing everything that's gone on in terms of additions and subtractions, as well as the new feature I like involving like a season preview kind of summary, season preview survey at talking about whether a team is contending, rebuilding, all of that. So we're going to talk about that more, but I definitely wanted to shout out, like, check that out. You can find that on Amazon. I'll have the link in the podcast description as well. But before we go directly into that book, Richard, which I want to spend a good bit of it on, I do want to talk to you about Team USA and really get your thoughts from a basketball analysis development perspective. Team USA basketball team went out there, they came, they saw, they did not conquer. They did not medal at all. And it was pretty underwhelming. I think that you had some good play from guys like Anthony Edwards, who really stepped up. I think Mikal Bridges did okay, but you also had guys that didn't do very well. Brandon Ingram was horrific there. So was the guy who didn't grab a rebound, but I'm just kidding. That was Jaren Jackson Jr., who just could not rebound. Like, it was a very interesting Team USA tournament, and I don't know how I feel other than to say it was disappointing. And so now I'm going to leave it to you. What do you think about it? What are your thoughts about Team USA and how they went?
Yeah, it's always kind of interesting with these FIBA World Cups, and it's largely seen in among like NBA players, and as sort of a secondary tournament to the Olympics. So you kind of get like a little bit of the kind of B squad, but it does kind of give you some insights as to, like, okay, some of the issues that are kind of plaguing kind of USA basketball, where one, it's kind of been going on, since like really like, after like around like, when the second, when the 96 Olympic team came in, like, and the Olympics that came after it, where we've been sort of just throwing teams together. We get sort of, throwing teams, coaching staffs together. And so you get like a team with a lot of talent, like man for man, the US squad is probably more talented than every country that was in the tournament. But, in terms of just how you play the game, where you need, chemistry, you need some kind of cohesive system to actually, to maximize all your talent, you have to have some kind of unifying structure. And then you just don't have that, where you have a bunch of guys who are kind of used to playing a certain way in the NBA, and then for whatever it is, 3-4 weeks, some of them have to change style, some of them don't. So then you get, where Brandon Ingram, for example, he's used to having the ball in his hands. But then you put him with Steve Kerr, who is really one of the only one or two coaches that run like a pure motion offense where they really don't want someone kind of stopping the ball all the time. So naturally there's a little bit of conflict, and like a guy like Brandon Ingram is going to struggle. Jaren Jackson, another one of these kind of guys that kind of is with, he's, again, he won Defensive Player of the Year in the NBA, but, Memphis plays two bigs. They like to, aggressively protect the paint. But that's not how Steve Kerr has ever coached with the Warriors, where he likes to switch everything, aggressively defend the three-point line. And so if you're telling Jaren Jackson to kind of to downshift, play center, also switch out on perimeter guys, you're going to get defensive breakdowns. And so it's something that over time, I think that USA basketball has to kind of find a way to kind of find some kind of just overarching style where they can actually just make the team building process a little better. Because then you come down in terms of the fact that the A squad is getting older. There was talk, LeBron wanted to come back to play in the Olympics in 2024, get Steph, get Kevin Durant and Anthony Davis. But then if you look at their ages, like LeBron is getting close to 40, Kevin Durant, they're in their mid 30s. And so this whole idea that if you just kind of just get all the stars back, it might be a temporary fix for 2024. But then if you look 2028, 2032, and you're looking at sort of the younger generation, if you reach back and try to get all the best players it might not be there, because the world is producing elite players they're producing elite players too. And I mean, if you look at it, like
on the same level,
the last 5 MVPs were won by three guys who are not from the United States, So, and then, so that's a issue that is going to have to be addressed, where they have to find a way to sort of maximize and build an actual team, rather than just kind of try to throw talent at the wall and see what sticks. And so
agreed. Yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, the quality of the competition has improved, right? And you mentioned, back in the 90s, like, basketball was different. You did have the best talent in the USA. And you had, of course, Oscar Schmidt and others, Drazen Petrovic, all these other great talents in other countries. But, like, in terms of, like, centralized basketball talent, I don't think it's controversial to say that was coming from the USA, right? But now, you mentioned the last 3 MVPs, all of them being from other parts of the world. The globalization of the game is an amazing thing, but it also makes it where the USA comes out and it's not just a given that they're going to be the best team, and not only is it whether it's the talent on the floor, but also, like, styles make fights. And that leads to my next question to you, Richard. What do you think was the biggest weakness of this Team USA squad? Because they did have some matchups. Germany was one. There was a few that they just didn't seem to be able to play well against for stretches.
Yeah, I think, like, one of the issues that just in overall, in terms of just the U.S. and developing players, is a lot of it is there's not a lot of diversification in terms of the skill sets of players, especially like star players, where our star players pretty much only know how to be star players, where if they are on their own team, the whole offense kind of runs through them. And they put up big scoring numbers and these things like that. But then if they have to be asked to, kind of play in secondary roles, or they got to lean more on the defensive end, it's not quite, they don't have the well-rounded skill sets to necessarily do. So in terms of team construction, you get a little bit of overlap where, there's Jalen Brunson, Anthony Edwards, and then even guys that they left off where, like Trae Young kind of overlaps with some of the guys that are more scoring guards. You have You have, and so you get guys that get too many guys for sort of those higher end roles, and you just don't have enough people to sort of do dirty work. So then you look at the losses where teams were shooting 50% from the field, that were knocking down 40% or high 30% of their threes. Yeah, the U.S. was getting out rebounded. So then, you get some deficiencies in the defensive department, and in some of those those dirty work kind of areas where you don't sort of have that. You don't have anyone to really fill those roles unless you really kind of dig deep, unless you really kind of take the effort to kind of dig deep into the league and go, okay, this is the kind of guy we need. And even like in terms of some people brought up, maybe they should have gone two bigs with Walker Kessler and Jaren Jackson, but then you kind of get the issue with a lot of the guys that specialize in defense, in like rim protection and rebounding. They tend to be drop cover bigs. So you're just, again, the offenses overseas, they run a lot of action to to generate 3-pointers. So you're trading off rim protection and all that for giving up the shots on the outside. So there's a little bit of just not having sort of a diverse enough roster makeup to match up with different teams. So in that regard, in how they construct 2024, they may have to, again, find some specialized role players to kind of fill in some of the gaps that they were missing this year. I mean, if you're looking at one guy that probably stands out as a guy that it wouldn't sound like he would make an Olympic team, but in terms of just what, if you just know that Steve Kerr is going to be the coach, and they're kind of missing defense and rebounding. Kevon Looney just kind of jumps out as the kind of guy who would fit where, again, play, high energy guy, can block shots, rebounds, but he also is a guy who he can handle himself on a switch, which, in terms of the style of defense they like to play, is kind of like, is another guy they could, kind of throw into a rotation if, assuming, maybe they get, Bam Adebayo or someone like that. I could see another kind of dark horse in that kind of regard. I could see, someone like Nick Claxton might make sense because he kind of has similar skill set, but, longer.
I worry about his girth, though.
Like, it would be a little bit of a specialized thing where it's if he's up against somebody who's if the other team doesn't have like a true like post up guy, like I wouldn't throw him up
Jokic or Valanciunas
but if you're maybe against this German squad where
Mo Wagner
again. Mo Wagner, Daniel Tice, it's like they move out, so they play a little more out on the perimeter a bit. So you might need somebody to switch there. That's a guy. So so that's, I mean, in terms of just getting guys who can kind of interchange, play different sort of roles in addition to just getting, in bringing in as much talent as you have, that's kind of one of those things that this next construction of Team USA they have to sort of consider because right now if you look even if you look at American born players under the age of 30, you're really kind of looking, maybe it's Jason Tatum, you're Devin Booker, but you're good players, but they're not the obvious sort of top 5 guys that we're used to having. So then, finding the right complements for these sort of guys is going to be more important moving forward. And so there are going to be some kind of systemic issues that are going to have to come into play where they might have to consider just somebody like finding someone who's, who has the availability to make this more of their full-time job, more so than getting someone like Steve Kerr, where his, again, Steve Kerr or any NBA coach, where it's coaching in the NBA is hard enough. Now you add the Olympics on top of it. You can't really devote your attention to both jobs. So this was kind of one of the things, at least in they kind of got right in around, that 2008, 2012, where coach, and even 2008, 2012, 2016, where this was Coach K's job, where this was a function of Coach K's job. And, he didn't have as demanding a schedule in college as, an NBA coach has. So yeah, maybe finding someone like Jay Wright comes to mind, where he's technically not coaching anywhere, but, accomplished enough, has played, at least in his latter years with Villanova when they were winning, played a style that kind of mimicked the NBA, especially now that a lot of his players are, they were on this last.
They're on
this
last
team.
Knicks.
Yeah, they're on the Knicks. They were on this
and last last squad,
FIBA
right?
team. So it's like, there could be a fit there. There could be a fit there where if he's if he concentrates his efforts on coaching Team USA, you add some of these guys like Spo and Ty Lue and these guys as assistants to kind of beef up kind of the brain power on the staff. Then you get a little bit of a better job, kind of scouting and kind of team building and kind of and those things to really kind of maximize kind of the talent pool, at least maximize like the quality of play on, in these kind of tournaments.
No, that makes a lot of sense for sure. And I guess I have one more question regarding, of course, Team USA. How do you think it looks, for the Olympics coming up, where you do have LeBron James, who's hinted at the interest of a return, maybe Kevin Durant, a Steph Curry. I mean, these guys are higher caliber players. Do you still, obviously they're higher caliber players over the players that we're currently representing in FIBA, right? With that being said, you still probably need those role players. JaVale McGee has been on the team, but like, what do you think the dynamic, like, let's say you get a few of those stars, obviously, do you take these existing players, some of which I doubt will make the official Olympic squad, but if you put those players who had more of a bigger role in this tournament into more specialized roles and let the stars do the leading, do you think US is back to its, Olympic supremacy when they bring out the big dogs?
I think there's enough talent where they could, but it would be harder because, again, you are still throwing a lot of guys into the mix, kind of who you throw in a lot of the guys into the mix that are kind of playing together for like maybe the first, they don't play together very often. There is talk that, with Joel Embiid's citizenship that, he could play for either the US or France. So a lot of, some of the concerns about a lack of size would be, kind of would be alleviated if, Embiid plays in, but then, and then some of this is just going to come down to like which guys are going to be healthy at the end, how far they go in the playoffs. And so there are a lot of moving pieces. So having like at least like maybe a few of the guys on this past team for just continuity and chemistry's sake, where at least you have a base of people who have some familiarity in playing together, and then you just sort of add some of the big guns as you go. So then you're not just kind of trying to figure all this out in like a 2 or 3 week span, because we've seen in the NBA when these super teams come together, a lot of them often stumble within the first. They kind of stumble out of the gates in the first couple of weeks just because they're trying to. There's just little kind of dynamic things that they're kind of sorting out, like how does the pecking order work? Okay, where do I fit in this offense? And so if you're still kind of working that out in a major tournament, because the Olympics is even a shorter turnaround than this one, where you just go round robin right into a knockout stage. And so if you kind of don't have you slip up in terms of chemistry, kind of in that knockout range, you can, really damaging. Even the last Olympics, even when they had Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Tatum, they lost their first, they lost to France the first game. So even though, it was, like a round robin play game, but they did lose. Even, they lost a game before they, kind of picked things up and, eventually pulled it out. So But if you're kind of doing this with, older squad, older squad, a lot of new faces, and then you have everybody else who's kind of, building on whatever, they're building on previous years of chemistry. Even if you look, Canada's made strides with, having Shea and RJ Barrett, Dylan Brooks came out of nowhere and dropped 39.
Didn't he?
And then, then that squad, we added Jamal Murray. So, and then, Germany has consistently sort of been, kind of building on their chemistry. And then you have,
with continuity.
Strong continuity. And then, France, getting Wembanyama, possibly Joel Embiid. Yeah. So
that's wild. You're right. That would be an inside-out matchup nightmare.
Yeah. So so you get teams that are sort of on the come up, and then you have the U.S. squad who is, even if you kind of say big guns in there, it's a lot of guys in their deep 30s.
Yeah, it reminds me of the 92 Olympic team in the sense of like these are like all-time legends that are great, but like all these guys are older, right? I mean, I guess can't say 92 Olympic. Let me not jump the gun, Richard. I think I'm a little too crazy saying
it's a little
Jordan.
But I mean, if you look at like the advantage that the 92 team had over, I mean, I actually looked this up where you looked at from an experience factor over like the rest of the Olympic competition to put it in perspective. Yeah, they had 11 guys, the 11 NBA players, they all made all-star teams. If you look at the teams from the 11 countries that were there were 11 guys that had played one NBA game prior to those Olympics. And then if you break down those 11, 3 of them you could probably say were good NBA players even at the time, where Detlef Schrempf was coming off. Sixth man of the year. Drazen Petrovic was just about it was first year starting. It was just about to kind of hit the All-Star team, and then Sarunas Marciulionis was one of the better six men. One of the better 6 men in the league for the Warriors. But even though Tony Kukoc was in it, Dino Raja was in it, they hadn't stepped foot in the NBA. So it's basically largely, like the dream team against a lot of guys who are rookies. So of course, you kind of, you get that squad and they're going to pound them by 40 and 50 points. Whereas the level of competition and the just knowledge, the ability of other countries to, apply basketball knowledge has increased, in 30 years. So kind of just relying on talent might, it could be enough to, there's enough talent in this country to, to pull it out, but long term, it's not really it might not be an effective strategy, considering that, the world's catching up, and there is some doubt over whether or not, we in the United States in terms of development are maximizing, the players we have. Because there is, as I said, some at time, our stars aren't as well rounded as maybe they were in past eras, and a little bit of overlap in terms of skill sets. So if you put all these guys together, you get style clashes and chemistry some chemistry issues that might, kind of come to bite the team kind of, in a future kind of tournament. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how, how what they do to kind of construct this team and try to move it forward so they don't kind of, so some, a loss like this doesn't, happen, in a future Olympics. So.
Yeah, that's true. I guess, you kind of gave a perfect synopsis in my mind on this, but anything else you want to say to kind of cap off, just the Team USA retrospective, if you will?
Yeah, I think like the way, I guess, there was I think I saw a tweet from Trey Kirby about the cycle of Olympic basketball, where it's like, about international basketball in the U.S., where it's, you don't take the they don't take these FIBA World Cup seriously, then they fail to medal, then they bring out the A squad, and then they win in the Olympics, and then they don't take this seriously, and then it kind of cycles that way. I don't know how long this cycle can you can really keep going and sustaining this, because at some point, the well of in terms of the well of talent isn't going to the talent gap isn't going to be so high anymore in favor of the US, where the rest of the world just keeps developing talent, and mainly like when they develop talent, for the develop young talent, it is almost it initially is for the purposes of international competition, and then whatever these guys do in the NBA is like kind of is second, is like kind of a cherry on top. If they get if they have an elite player, cool, but but largely their focus is they want to medal in these things. They want to compete, and they kind of compete and beat the US. And so if they're working, they constantly are working to this goal, and kind of the US is a little bit asleep at the wheel in terms of kind of these international competitions, these kind of too divert, at some point it's going to come to a head, and like the US is going to fall short if they don't kind of start taking these tournaments and their sort of developmental model kind of seriously. So it is something, at least now, it'll be interesting to see if it ever gets to kind of a breaking point where, like the rest of there may be a day where the rest of the world sort of passes the US in these tournaments, even though we do have, all stars, and we have all stars and all NBA players playing in these things. So,
yeah. Would you consider this a wake-up call, or is that being maybe a touch dramatic?
I would go kind of mild in terms of, I guess like it's because we've gotten kind of a lot of these, and at this juncture where, I mean, in 2019, like this, they didn't, in the 2019 World Cup team finished worse than this one, and they had Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and and Donovan Mitchell on that team, and so. But then in Tokyo they won gold, and then there were some issues. So I think it's like I guess it always comes back to if these issues come up in an Olympics where at least our elite players care more.
Yeah.
Then then that will be kind of then there'll be a need for a major shakeup in terms of USA, in terms of USA basketball needing to kind of overhaul their current process and how they pick teams for these sort of things. Yeah.
No, you're right. I think it's interesting. I'm glad that we had this discussion. I got to give you credit for even bringing it up as a topic to talk about, because I was like, wasn't very good. The teams weren't, like, talent-wise, they weren't super great. The matchup didn't work, end of story. But there was a lot more to talk about in terms of this unit, why they succeeded, or in this case, why they failed, and what we can glean from that moving forward. So definitely appreciate you taking the time to talk about that, Richard, for sure.
No problem.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, I hate to say we have something even better to talk about than that, but we do. I love basketball. I love books. Richard, you're my guy because you somehow give me the best of both worlds with a basketball book. You've been putting out 2 every year for the past, 7-8 years? I think your first one was the 2017 draft almanac.
2017 draft, and then I started doing the preview like 2018.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so you've had a book. Yeah, you've had a book going on 7 years now. A book going on 7 years for sure, and then really twice a year, 2 books a year for like the past 5.5, right?
Yeah.
So there you go with that. Like that right there is something I greatly appreciate, because I love being able to, basketball is just one of those things we all love. It's called Roundball Ramble for a reason. But to be able to read a book that will help me either pick up on the draft, pick up on the new season. Yes, there's a lot of great content on the websites all over, great talented authors in blogs, and you have a blog yourself and you have additional content that goes there, some of which I could also get in a book, but I digress. But in this case, you have what I call the stars of the shows. Just before the draft, you get the NBA draft preview almanac that goes into the offseason kind of previews of all 30 NBA teams, as well as a full detailed draft scouting report for all the players entering the current draft. And then just before the season, you drop the NBA preview almanac, which is a recap of the offseason of these teams and a preview on what they will like moving forward, as well as player by player projections for literally each player on the NBA roster. And we have our latest one here now. We have the 2023-2024 NBA draft or NBA preview almanac. And Richard, I want you to take a minute to explain for those who are uninitiated and didn't listen to my spiel here what your books are about generally, or more specifically, what your preview almanac is about.
Yeah, so the preview almanac really it's a guide to help you kind of get ready for the season. So they're in that there kind of little summaries on kind of what kind of teams did in the offseason, who was subtracted, who was added, and then kind of some little summary about how they might be expected to do. Are they rebuilding, contending, maybe who on the roster could break out, and in general how they're going to perform, and then there are individual sort of player pages that display kind of a projection of what their stats might look like for the upcoming season, and then also has a little bit of a scouting report to kind of tell you where their skills are, what their skills are, and kind of where they're at kind of heading into this season. So then you have kind of an idea of what the team's going to look like in general, but also kind of break down the players on the roster and sort of what they do, how they might fit in, and and where they kind of fall in a kind of a rotation. So then as you're watching games throughout the season, you can kind of get a sense of what's going to happen, and who's who everyone is in the league, and so you have all that information handy. So that's more or less what the preview almanac does.
Yeah, I love that. I also love how you put together, again, essentially scouting reports on each player. I was looking through the Kings earlier today, and one of my favorite players to watch is my guy Malik Monk. And so you have, just giving a synopsis here, like their ideal, stats, whether it goes from like height, weight, their cap number, how many years they have left. And then you have this really cool feature in addition to the baseline basic stats and advanced metrics for the player. You have two things I like. One is your similarity score, which I'd like you to talk about more in a minute here, where you have players at that age that share statistically, the same or similar score to the player here. So for Malik Monk, it's funny. Another guy I like back in the day, his similarity score, the number one is Brandon Knight, which love me Brandon Knight, kind of slim combo guard. Injuries really messed him up, but I really thought he was going to be not a star, but a really, really, really good player in the NBA. And you also have guys like Kendrick Nunn and Malik Beasley, and on the very far end, Bradley Beal, but like the very far end, like they're not that similar at all. But in the mindset of like the type of player. And then what I also like is you give a series of bullet points. I'd say it's about 10 bullet points, and half are offensive and half are defensive. So like for Malik Monk, you say, league average career 3-point shooter, percentages vary a bit year from year. Great spot shooter, makes pull-up threes on pick and rolls, less effective in shooting off screens. All of these different like bullet points to make the scouting report. I want to ask you first just how you're able to assemble all this data on each of these players, because this happens for every player for all 30 teams all throughout the book. And then I'd like you to talk about your similarity score and just how that comes into play as well.
Yeah, so a lot of this, in terms of just gathering data for these scouting reports, it's also a lot of it, it's a combination of just kind of looking at, just because of my background, just, doing sort of analytics. And so trying to like break this down in a way that, kind of is easily understandable. So a lot of this is, some of this is looking at like a basketball reference, stat page, synergy kind of synergy, kind of situational kind of breakdowns, and then just, in terms, and then, also just keeping in mind, I guess, a lot of the, kind of just a lot of notes from, games I watched throughout the year. So then it's looking at kind of just every kind of, in constructing the scouting report portion, every, any useful piece of information, and just kind of breaking that down in a language that's kind of simple and understandable. So then you get a good sense of like what guys can, what guys' skills are, and what they, and what their strengths, weaknesses are in on both sides of the ball. So that's more or less how that works. And then similarity scores, it's based on kind of it's really the backbone of the projection system I use to kind of create kind of projections for individual players, and then teams, as I put, the projections from players and into, the team, where basically you just take anyone's kind of stat line, or in my case, it's kind of a weighted 3-year kind of sample. So then, so to kind of give more, to give a sense of kind of where that player has been, so in his most kind of recent kind of period. So you take kind of a general kind of stat line, compare it against a database of just pretty much every player from the modern era. And so based on body types and different tendencies, it spits out kind of what skill, what their, which players their stats are most similar to. So that's kind of where those comp lists come in. And it's, we're generally, for most of the league, you're going to get, you're going to see the types as, you're going to see types as, kind of them comparing to similar type, where a spot up shooter will compare to other spot up shooters from the past. Or, if you get somebody like, Seth Curry, who's kind of a undersized kind of shooting specialist, you'll see kind of other guys of that skill set. So, skill set sort of pop up, but then you get some guys who just have very unique styles, unique body types. You get sort of, you may not get 1-to-1 matches, but you kind of get, maybe like there are pieces of this person here, there are pieces of another person, and but it all can kind of help to get a sense of like what their stats are going to might look, what their stats are going to look like coming into the season. Are they going to hold steady? Are they going to improve? Maybe, if it's an older player, they might be in decline. So this is information you can get from this book.
I love the way you broke that down. That makes perfect sense in terms of explaining that. So no, I really appreciate that. I again, there's so much about this book. As you can tell, I'm a fan, and sometimes I'm just like, so great, check it out. Which, folks, it's so great, check it out. But also want to ask you, Richard, what other features would you like to share about this book? How it differs from your draft almanac is probably one, although the biggest difference is your draft almanac focuses on the offseason previewing and, of course, the draft. But are there any of the features that you're excited to share, or that you think people should know about the NBA preview almanac?
Yeah, I mean, this one just, in terms of just refined how just kind of complete it is. I know, like, as kind of alluded to earlier, there's a little more analysis at least at the team level, just to kind of get kind of some analysis on how teams might perform in terms of, in how they might perform, not just kind of at the individual level, where, it's like, what we might expect coming into the year. Maybe there might be some changes and those kind of things. So that's in there. I also kind of revamped a little bit of I created, like in previous versions, I had created sort of defensive metrics to measure the difficulty of matchups and performance on-ball defense. So this one, a little more organization to it this time around. So I grouped it kind of by position. So then you can kind of see in terms of, you can get a better sense of what players' roles are on the defensive end. So they kind of more like point of attack defenders versus, wing stoppers versus kind of roaming kind of help guys, or, kind of or just, you know, kind of straight up rim protectors. So you can kind of get a little bit more of a better sense of kind of what is going on the defensive side of the ball in terms of how certain teams might kind of utilize specific guys on this side of the ball that usually kind of doesn't get covered as often as, you know, the offensive side does. So getting a sense of, you know, just some guy, you know, if you're ever wondering, like, yeah, why does Torrey Craig play so much? This kind of these kind of metrics might help to kind of get a sense of kind of better sense of kind of who he is, because of, you know, kind of the type of matchups he, you know, kind of guys like this kind of can take on. So yeah, and this, you know, kind of seeing somebody like, even, you know, kind of evaluating someone like Herb Jones, where you kind of, you know, you have an idea when you're watching him that he's, you know, a good defender, but then if you kind of see like the fact that, you know, he took on some of the toughest matchups in the league, like on a consistent basis, you know, we're like, okay, maybe he might actually be underrated, you know, in terms of his defensive value, where he might not be getting enough credit for the things he's doing. So yeah,
that makes sense. You know, I get that. I like that you showcase that too, because you look at a guy like Herb Jones and it's like, hey, offensively, not super great, right? His shooting's kind of been spotty, like all the things, right? But then defensively, you know, he's a defensive-minded player. But do you know the value that he brings defensively? Like you said, the point of attack defense, the tougher matchups. So your book does do a great job of really highlighting those. So as you, the reader, can look and go, okay, yeah, he's a defender, but do you realize he's defending, you know, a high-end matchup 48% of the time or 55% of the time? I'm literally throwing out numbers. These are not actual statistics from the book. Like it gives you some more context that will aid you as a viewer, and I definitely appreciate that as well. I do have a question, because the similarity scores are so cool, but I do find that there's certain players that it looks difficult to maybe find a score for, whether they played. I've been reading your books for years, so I know, as I read, let's say 2 years ago, Vince Carter. Very hard to find a similarity score for a wing player, you know, 42, you know, there just wasn't enough players that matched either of those criteria to really get a sample size for. I see another player I'd like to ask you about in LeBron James, where, yes, you know, at the age, there are players who have played up to 38, yes. But with the numbers and production, there aren't. So, I mean, maybe Karl Malone, as somebody who, like, put up those numbers, and even Karl Malone wasn't putting up the type of numbers that LeBron is putting up in points, rebounds, and assists in his age 38th year, but also year 21. So I ask you, like, what are some players that you find interesting for whatever reason when you put together a similarity score?
Yeah, like, I mean, LeBron has just always been kind of like a tough guy to project, because even when he was in his prime, where they're just like, yeah, I mean, in terms like his listed body type, like it's been around like, yeah, like earliest years, it started out 6'8", 240. Then it moved. Then in those, you know, in his years in Miami, you know, he was a little bit bigger, so like it came up 262. And so in terms of just somebody with that body type and his like skill level, it's just there are just not a lot of guys that put up, and, you know, and the fact that, you know, LeBron has been so productive for his entire career, there's just not many, you know, he's an outlier in general. So if you're kind of comparing an outlier to other sort of people that are kind of closer to normal on the bell curve, you're just not going to, it's going to be hard to find people similar. So, and then now if you'll even look in kind of that, the kind of how, you know, the changes in the game where, you know, where, you know, we're encouraging everyone to shoot threes. So then, you know, you're looking at, you know, guys like Towns, yeah, all these like, you know, all these stretch bigs around the league. They're just, again, there's not that many, you know, even like someone like Larry Markkinen, where you just don't have a lot of 7-footers that have shot threes at the same volume as the guys that are now. So sometimes there's going to be a little bit of trying to figure out what comps. Yeah, the system kind of coming in, it largely kind of uses it just uses, you know, a formula to sort of figure out these similar players. And so if you're going to have guys who are a little bit different, even Giannis is kind of in there where, again, his trajectory and his kind of his, skill set, because we're also, bigger, like guys who would normally have been interior players back, in the 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s are handling the ball and they're handling the ball and doing, they have
more perimeter skills.
Yeah, more perimeter skills. And so they're just different skill profiles that the system has to try to sort of reconcile. And so it is kind of, there are kind of, a lot of it comes down to just, people, rare skill, rare production kind of levels where, I mean, even Steph is just, like, there's just not anyone that's shot this well and has been this, like, and even at that size has been, just putting up elite numbers like this. Because again, like, point guards back in the day were more table setting kind of type of guys. So
score first, really.
Yeah. So yeah, you even get guys like that, but then there are just guys, unusual body types also come in where, like, even someone like, Pokashevsky from Oklahoma City, where you have, he's 7 foot and he's under 200. And so you get, you trying to figure out, what to do with a 7 foot guy in his early 20s with, kind of that, that skill set and body type is going to be kind of difficult. So yeah, anytime you kind of find people that, are kind of unique and, kind of different than kind of what is kind of the norm, it's always kind of interesting to see what that system is going to, what they're gonna do, because they're just, sometimes there's just not a lot of other, historical precedents to kind of base this on. So
oh yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Like, it's different. I wanted to ask you, speaking of that, how hard was it for Victor Wembanyama?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, because now, we're entering
once he gets the sample size, right?
Yeah, I mean, because we're entering into, like, rare skills, and he's also in the like upper, whatever it is, the upper fraction of 1% of players in terms of height.
Yeah.
So even just finding, because
Ralph Sampson.
I mean, we might be talking, like projecting about Ralph Sampson, probably a lot of Kristaps Porzingis.
Yeah. Oh, that's another one.
Yeah. I mean, depending on where Wembanyama is listed, it's, if he's listed anywhere from 7'3" to 7'5", so if he's if he's closer to and then in terms of
okay. Oh, I think we paused there for a sec, but can
Hello?
you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. We're back. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So no, that could definitely be that could be interesting. That could be interesting. That's for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, Porzingis is probably going to show up on a lot of these lists just because at least when Porzingis came into the league, he was a little bit on the skinnier side. And so so that's going to be another one where you're just going to even if like at his highest level of, and also you're going to if you're projecting sort of, if he ends up becoming the player he could be, you're talking these extremely high levels of production on top of just having just kind of one of the more unusual body types we've seen kind of come into the league. So that's just always kind of something interesting to look out for, because even in terms of, if we're looking at past super prospects, Zion Williamson is another one of them where there just hasn't been anyone kind of at that sort of, with that sort of frame and size kind of come in, produce at a high level, and also kind of, play a little bit on the perimeter. So then, so that list sometimes looks a little kind of unusual in terms of the kinds of players it because oftentimes, like in just creating these like statistical models, it works off, just, you match body types before you match skill set. And so if you have, trying to find people at that body type is just going to be it's going to be hard
Different.
to find matches. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Well, I definitely, for one, thank you that you take the time to really come out here and, do this labor of love for us, the readers, to really learn about, the upcoming season, the roster changes, how teams are constructed. It's just a really, really invaluable resource from one basketball fan to another. So I want to say thank you for that. And I want to have you close out just by telling folks where they can find both this book and all your others. I think I have most of them on back order. And the ones I don't have, I plan on filling the gaps because I still think they're really cool books to have.
Yeah, you can find them on my Amazon author page. It's you can just kind of look up my name on Amazon and it should pop up, but it's, Amazon.com/author/RVL hoops. That should take you to the link to everything that I've put out. Also follow me on, I guess it's now called X. You can call it former Twitter app named after the 24th letter of the alphabet. My username is @RVL hoops. And so, you can find, me there. You can pay attention to that for future book releases. Also, I have a Substack called The Addendum. Yeah. And that, you can find that, it's richardlou.substack.com. And so you could, and so occasionally I come in, with blog content, just share my thoughts, during the season, on various topics. So those are the links. And if you looking for books, you can find me in any of those.
Well, thank you so much, Richard, for sure. We're going to have you on very soon. As we were talking beforehand, we're getting into NBA preview season. So I'm going to do division previews. I'm also going to sprinkle in some team-specific podcasts with some special guests, but Rich will be on to tackle a division. I definitely look forward to that. So we'll be able to hear more from him very soon. Also, I will have all the descriptions for everything he described in the description of this podcast. So definitely make sure to check out The Addendum, his Substack, check out NBA Scouting Live, the blog. I think both Richard and his brother do, as well as all of his books and the written work there. So definitely make sure to check that out. And you'll be hearing Richard here on this pod more. We have a lot of plans coming into this season and things that I think will be fun to do moving forward. So thank you, Richard, again. And find him on Twitter @RVL hoops. As for myself, you can find me on Twitter @Corban NBA, CORBAN NBA. If you are so inclined, I will greatly appreciate it. Check me out on Instagram there as well. Don't have a whole lot there right now, but we're planning on getting that figured out. So definitely make sure to check me out there as well. Check out Sports Ethos on Twitter @Sports Ethos, SPORTSETHOS, online, sportsethos.com. A lot more content than just this show, including some other podcasts I am a part of. So definitely make sure to check that out there. But with that, the wrap up is over. For Richard, for myself, we are Frosty. Y'all stay frosty, and we will talk to y'all real soon. All right, y'all.